Alright, so this is my Cetme L, and this is my very first time shooting it since I built this rifle a couple weeks ago. I didn't really do any videos with it because I was tuning it up and all that, making sure everything was right, making sure you know, everything was copacetic with it. I finally got tuned to where everything should work. So let's check it out. I'm probably gonna pause here because I think somebody's rolling on up here at the ranch. One of the neighbors. So yeah, that was one of the other property owners up the street. He heard the shooting, come checked it out, you know. I'm not normally here on the weekdays, so you know, stuff like that. Anyways, so like I said, this is my Cetme L. I built this a couple weeks back, and you know, I wanted to tune it up, make sure everything was running right on it before I, you know, took it out and shot it and all that. It is built on an original Spanish Cetme parts kit. The flat is a Marklemar flat, and I did bend it with an HMG jig, and you know, I'll get more into that, into the stuff of that, but you know, I'll go over all the features and stuff when I do the tabletop. So let's see if it shoots. That recoil is interesting. Okay, so first thoughts. First of all, taking off the glasses because they're interfering with the sights. The recoil was lighter than the AR-15, and this thing isn't really any heavier, but it's got a weird recoil impulse. Interesting. Alright guys, welcome back. Sorry if I'm sounding a little sniffly. It's currently here in the 40s out at the ranch. I came back out here again to try to get myself a deer. Anyways, so what we have here, we're doing the tabletop on my Cetme L that I built. But before we get to that, if you wouldn't mind, give me a like and a subscribe. I'm trying to get up to 1,000 this year, but you know, I don't think it's going to happen for me this year, but you know, I'm going to hit it hard next year and keep going and try to come up with more entertaining content. Anyway, so this is my Cetme L. This is a parts kit build, as I previously mentioned, that is an original parts kit. It's pretty much everything that's original is the grip, stock, foregrip, the shroud, this tube here, rear sight, muzzle brake, you know, sight block, stuff like that, and some of the fire control stuff, not everything. And I'll explain that in a little while. As I mentioned before, this is a gun that I built. It's actually technically the first parts gun that I built that I actually got operational. The PPS-41 and the PPS-H-41 and the PPS-43, they're on standby because I'm trying to find someone who can machine the bolts for the semi-auto conversions. Those are pretty much done though. Besides that, so you know, I gotta do an update on those. But talking about this, so basically, it's a parts kit. This is a Marklemar flat that I bought, and I bent it with the HMG jig, and I welded it all together. And I had some issues when I first got it built. The problem was something with the HMG jig. The way, first of all, I had to modify the jig for the flare. The Marklemars have this ejection flare, which is on the original rifles, and the HMG guns do not. So I had to modify the jig to accept this flare, and then also the jig made these extra tight press marks in certain spots, which ended up not being too big of an issue. I thought they might be, but what did become an issue is the jig was a little sloppy when bending the receiver into shape. So what happened was, the first malfunctions I had, what's happening is the ejector the low ejector claw that's part of the fire control group was getting off track and jamming the bolt in the rear position, but not fully rear. And that was because the the receiver was a little wide, so the bolt was able to kind of wobble back and forth like this inside of the receiver, which would get it off track. Now, after some annoyance and pain, I was able to get it bent down and tight enough to where it no longer does that, and I no longer have that malfunction. So I'm still breaking it in. You saw some of the footage here when I was wearing my Romanian surplus parka. That was after the bend. So now that it's bent, I'm probably going to go back through and repaint this again. It's all scuffed up and everything from, you know, all the bending and stuff like that. So it's probably going to get a fresh coat of paint soon. But as of now, it shoots normal. I did have a couple malfunctions. Both of those were pretty much the brass being bounced back into the receiver by some weird ejection stuff going on. So, you know, can't really do anything about that. It's still breaking in. What's interesting about these is that these were designed in the late 70s, early 80s to replace the Cetme C, which is like my Century Arms C308, and those were 308 battle rifles. Of course, you know, about a decade earlier, the U.S. had really moved towards the AR platform, the N4 platform. So, you know, everyone else in NATO was trying to say, okay, yeah, we need to build a 5.56 rifle to work with, you know, to go with all of our NATO magazines. Germany and all of them, they pretty much kept the G3 platform, which was based off the Cetme. They built their own rifles on the G3 platform that shot 5.56 and took standardized mags. And Spain went ahead and they said, you know, we're going to kind of do our own thing again, and we're going to design a new rifle. But it's pretty much the same rifle, because really the only thing they did differently is they made this rifle into 5.56, but practically every other system on it is more or less identical to the old Cetme. The only real difference is when it comes to cocking, you don't have the bolt lock up here on the tube like on the L. You have it right here. And I'll go over that in a minute when we go over the coat of arms on this. So they designed their new rifle, and they only really fielded it for, you know, less than 10 years. I think it was only in service from like 87 to like 99. So it wasn't in service for a very long time, and to be honest, I understand why. It's not that capable of a platform for like the 80s and 90s, to be honest, when compared to like the AR platform. I understand in the late 80s and early 90s, we were already starting to move towards ARs that had, you know, we were figuring out that the M4s were better if we had pick rails on them. We could have more options for mounting and stuff like that. We were kind of starting to get that rolling and figuring out by then. And of course, the Germans were already doing all that stuff as well. So it's kind of interesting that they fielded something like this that's more or less a rifle that would have been more in place in like the 40s and 50s, as opposed to something that was in the late 80s and 90s. So it didn't have a long service life, and they've had issues with them or whatnot. The domestic produced companies that make them brand new that you can buy complete guns is HDM and Mark Lamar. And they have their reputations for being iffy guns. And it's not really on Mark Lamar's or HMG's fault. It's really the design of the rifle itself. It doesn't lead to be super reliable. The roller delay system uses it's real energetic, system as far as recoiling backwards and ejecting and stuff like that. But surprising enough, this gun recoils very, very lightly. It doesn't have a recoil impulse that, to me, it feels almost lighter than my ARs that are in 5.56. So, it's very pleasant to shoot. It's reasonably accurate up close. It does have a peep sight here rated for 200 and 400. I'm going to assume meters, seeing out it's Spain. And, they do everything metric. So, it's not made for really up-close shooting as far as battle sights go. I guess if you really want to get, battle sights, you can kind of turn these sideways and maybe just use this big notch if you're really up close, but it's not really optimized for up close fighting. Especially seeing how this thing was a select fire rifle, and this thing could do like almost 700 rounds a minute. So yeah, I would have thought it would have had something a little bit better. Now they did have some military variants that had rails on this for optics and stuff like that, but this configuration is the basic configuration. And of course they also had some with collapsing stocks and all that cool stuff. And believe it or not, the collapsing stock on its own costs more than one of these parts kits, which is nuts. But you know, very cool rifle. I'm not going to do the disassembly on this rifle for a couple reasons. So in theory, it disassembles very easily, just like on the Cetme C and the Century Arms C308. You have 3 push pins. You push these pins out, and then you can remove the stock off the back and then the fire control group off the bottom. But before you can remove the fire control group, you actually have to disassemble the safety, and the safety actually turns down and out to this position, and then there's a very special little spot you have to find and move the fire control group back slightly and in the right direction, and then you can lift it out. Then you can take the fire control group out. It's a bit of a pain, so I'm not going to do it. I might do. I'm probably going to do a video that's just a disassembly and reassembly of this rifle, because it's got some hanky stuff with it. Now, like I said, this is a built kit myself, so I did do some tuning and stuff like that. The action's actually slightly shorter than what it is factory because of the way I ground it up and all that stuff like that. So it's a little different. Now the way that this works, because it's a roller locker, if you look down there, you can see the bolt and the lock. And the first issue I had was because actually I think because I had this slightly longer. This right here, cocking like that, is the leverage that actually breaks open the bolt. Without doing that, you can't open up the bolt from the rifle in here. So basically, you open this up and then you just let it go, and just that force going forward locks the bolt. Now, if you're locking the gun, you want to lock the bolt in the rear position, like say if you're reloading and whatnot. You pull it back. Pull it back all the way, push this little pin in, and then you can let it go like that. In theory, you're supposed to be able to push this button on the other side to release the bolt. Well, my problem is when I welded this is ever so slightly cocked off to the left. I mean, it's almost impossible to notice it, but because of that, it jams up the bolt release and it doesn't want to release properly. Now, the windage is fully adjustable for a little bit, and elevation is also adjustable, almost like an AK. It's slightly different design, but you do have adjustable windage and elevation on the rifle, so you can zero the irons on it, which is something you can't always do on some of these older surplus rifles. Now, it does weigh about 7 pounds, maybe close to 8, depending on which model you have, and it is meant to take any standardized magazine. Now, I haven't tried composite magazines in this yet. I'm using some Vietnam era surplus mags, aluminums, because that's more period correct for the gun, but I haven't had a chance to try composites and see how composites work. I've had people tell me that composites work just fine, and other people say, well, sometimes you gotta do a little bit of trimming to make them fit. But so far my experience is if you stick with the metal mags, it does just fine. Now, it does lock in just like an AR, and then you do have an AR style release. Now, my mag is a little tight in there. I wanted it like that. I kind of wish I made it a little loose, but I wanted it tight for, reliability issues. Now, one problem with the mag release, you can see it is far forward. To be honest, they could have shortened up the receiver to this gun quite a bit. To be honest, this trigger could have been back here. The guard could have been back here. The mag well could have been back here. And then you could have had that mag release within a good reaching distance. The safety is also, if you have small hands, a little far away to reach. But, it's not that bad. Now, let's do a trigger test here. So it is on fire. You see, gun is empty. So a little bit of creep. Then we hit a wall. A little bit more creep. Creep, 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 and then go. Okay. Okay, reset. Not bad. So, I mean, it's not horrible for a milsurp trigger, but, you know, it's not the best out there. Now, when I bought this flat from from Merkelmore, the flat came actually as a kit. So it was a flat and the fire control, I want to say the housing, which is this aluminum piece here, and then you get the magwell blocker right here, and then there's another little blocker down in here that's cut out, so only a semi-auto magwell will fit in here, and then the rear trunnion comes in that kit, and then you actually have to mail in your safety selector, and when you mail in your safety selector, they machine it and send it back to you, and that's all part of that kit for the receiver. So I think, and then of course, you know, I bought a barrel. I think I bought that from them as well, and then I had to do a spring kit in it as well, because these spring kits, the springs that are in these are usually blown out, because they were, even though they weren't in service for a long time, they were heavily used. They did practice with these guns a lot, and of course the nature of the system, that bolt's going back so fast, it's hard on springs. So that's all new. So I think, you know, maybe a total, I got maybe $900 invested in this gun to be built. And the reason why I want it is because it's just such a unique looking gun. You know, it's just interesting looking. It looks so 80s, so Cold War. It's just a neat looking gun. And, you know, of course, the OD grain, this is how these were in the military. So, you know, you don't get much more interesting looking than that. I do need to find me a Spanish bayonet that will go on this. But, you know, besides that, you know, it's just neat. Biggest complaints about the gun is, you know, so far I'm still breaking it in. So, you know, I'm still having malfunctions and whatnot with it. The takedown is a bit of a pain with that safety lever. It's a pain. When I do the disassembly video, I'm going to try to do it all in one take. And y'all might see exactly how much of a pain it is. I'm not going to do it right now here at the ranch. Because last time I did it, I actually fiddled with it for an hour, which for some reason never took me that long, but I fiddled with it for an hour, couldn't get it, had to stop, then pick it back up the next day, and then fiddle with it some more, and I was finally able to get it out so I can reassemble it. And part of the reason why I had to do that is because the bolt, you have to install the bolt forward in the forward position before you can install the fire control group. And that's because the hammer, the way the hammer sits in here, you can't insert the hammer or insert the bolt when the hammer's in any position, because the bolt's going to stop on it. So you literally have to have the bolt in inside the gun in the forward position and then lift it up into it, so the hammer sits on the bottom of the bolt and you can assemble it. So it's a bit of a pain. So I can honestly say this gun wasn't very ergonomically designed for field stripping or any of that stuff. I'm not exactly sure what the thought of it was as far as putting it together like that. It's easy to build. It's a cheap rifle to build. You can tell that just by the design. Everything's stamped on it. And very little milled parts. Just not very ergonomic. And I'm not honestly sure what Spain replaced this rifle with in 1999. Or 2000. I'm gonna have to look that up and see. I'm at the ranch. I can't even get service to tell you. But during post edit, I'll put a link and a picture down below, something like that, showing what they did replace this with, because they had to replace it pretty fast. As far as shooting it, like I said, recoil is very pleasant, easy to control. It actually feels really good, easy to control, and it is fairly accurate, at least at the ranges that I've shot it at. So, which is kind of good. Now, you do get a big muzzle flash on it, and like I said, because it is a roller delay, I mean, this thing will sling brass. I might still have to do some tuning with the ejection port to increase its reliability as far as ejecting, but as far as of right now, I think it's doing pretty good, and I think it might just need to be broken in with a couple hundred rounds. Now, I know y'all saw Demolition Ranch had a video where he actually bought one of these a couple months back, but he bought one that was pre-built from I think his was a Marklemar. He bought one that was pre-built, and he had a lot of malfunctions and stoppages with his. But also, you have to keep in mind, his rifle was brand new and not broken in. So a lot of people will get guns and, you know, try to shoot a couple boxes of ammos and have a bunch of malfunctions and not realize that guns have to be broken in. And you really don't start getting reliability until a gun's been very thoroughly broken in. And, you know, of course, that operation, that breaking in process, it wears down sharp edges, catches, stuff like that. It slops up the gun a little bit, but makes it more reliable. That's why AKs tend to be so reliable, because they were such loose tolerances that it just kind of bounces around and goes into battery. It doesn't have any, you know, issues doing it. So now, I will say, if you're looking at getting into parts kits building, if you're wanting to start building parts kit guns, this one here in the Cetme C are probably the easiest parts kits you can get as far as being able to build your gun in a short amount of time. Of course, you know, with the way that this is bent and pressed, you can easily weld this together with a MIG welder if that's all that you have. If you're sufficient with it, then, you know, you can do it with this rifle. You just got to be careful about burning through this thin. The jigs are fairly readily available. Marklemar actually has a rental jig service where they send you a rental jig and you have it for a certain amount of time to do your bending and stuff like that. Then they charge you per month after that. So if you wanted to build a couple of these, you could. The parts kits, like I said, are about $300, you know, $350 depending on what they're looking around, but they're going to be going up. And the barrels, everything, and the semi-auto parts, which is the most important, are available through at least Marklemar. I'm not sure if HMG does it, but at least through Marklemar. So right now, you can easily get this gun built and together. Unlike the Cetme C, which in theory is cheaper to build as a whole than the L is. But in my when I was doing my research a couple weeks back, I couldn't find semi-auto parts for the conversion, which is a major deal breaker for a lot of people wanting to build kits legally. So that's a bit of an issue because I'm wanting to build a shorty. I'm wanting to do more like a type. I think it's the German Type 56 or something like that, and it's basically just the G3, but it's got like an 8-inch barrel or something like that, and a collapsible stock and stuff like that. So it's, you know, really short 308 rifle. So I kind of want to build one of those, but this here right now seems to be the fastest, easiest, and cheapest as far as building a kit. The PPS 43s are technically cheaper and easier and faster to build if there were some semi-auto bolts on the market, and that's where you really hold up is the semi-auto bolts. So if you're looking to get a parts kit, you know, look around, see what you want, but I recommend starting with one of these because you can very easily, with very little knowledge of firearms and measurements and stuff like that, get this to go together and work fairly accurately. So, not that hard. As far as buying one of the pre-made guns from Marklemar, those run usually $1,200 to $1,400. Some of them up to like $1,500 if you're getting the ones with the collapsible stocks. Like I said, if you want a pre-built gun, go for that. These are interesting guns. If you get one of them, you're going to have a much nicer looking gun than this, obviously. They're still going to use some parts kit stuff, but I believe they do have the grips. I know they make in-house as American-made grips, and I think the buttstocks as well. So they do some where they have some US-made parts for that 922R compliant stuff, but it is, you know, they're neat guns, for sure. So if y'all want to take a look at one, you know, find one for yourself, go right on ahead and let me know what you think about the model, the Cetme L. You know, do you like the L or do you like the C better? Because personally, I like both of them. I'm still getting to know this one. I'm still getting to know both of them, to be honest, but, you know, pretty good, you know. Yeah, check them out. They're neat. You know, the cool collectors. You don't get guns that look like this in the U.S. You know, it just looks interesting. But y'all have a good one, and I'll see y'all in the next video.